This is a story about judicial injustice and the struggle for innocence. When an ordinary young man is falsely accused of being a pervert on the train, he refuses to plead guilty, even if it means facing the presumption of guilt from the entire Japanese judicial system. He is determined to fight for his innocence to the end. As the train arrives at the station, people pour out of the carriage like a tide. Suddenly, a girl who looks like a student grabs a man in front of her and shouts, "What are you doing? I'm going to sue you!" This draws the attention of the station staff, who take several people into the station's duty room to record the situation. Before long, the police arrive and take the two away. While the police handle the case, the girl is in tears, saying she was harassed on the train. She explains that she had experienced similar incidents before and had reported them, but was told that not having physically grabbed the perpetrator's hand did not count as evidence. So this time, she mustered the courage to grab the man's hand, but he quickly broke free. As she pulled her hand back, she noticed the man behind her was wearing a shirt with the same color as the sleeve she had just grabbed. So she chased him outside the train and grabbed his hand again. In the adjacent interrogation room, the man, named Kaneko Teppei, faces Officer Yamada's furious questioning with a bewildered expression, but remains silent, emptying everything from his bag. Seeing the man feigning innocence, Yamada's anger rises. He has seen too many like him. The man had been arrogant at first, refusing to admit anything. But when the police began to collect evidence of fibers from the victim's underwear on his hands, his expression changed drastically, and he immediately confessed. So Yamada couldn't be bothered to collect fiber samples from his hands, and started writing the investigation report based solely on the girl's testimony. After all, once he confessed, he could just pay a fine and leave, and no one would know, allowing these scoundrels to return to their normal lives. However, to his surprise, the man stubbornly insisted he had done nothing wrong. Yamada reminded him that if he was honest, he could be out soon, just like a traffic violation. Just pay a fine. Teppei glanced at him and said, "I didn't do it." After signing the confession, he was taken to a detention center to await further investigation. In the detention center, a fellow inmate told him he could request assistance from the duty lawyer. He then explained to the lawyer that he had gone for a job interview that day. He was supposed to get off at Yasukawa Station, but wanted to check if he had brought his resume. However, the train was too crowded, so he got off at Gozodai Station, only to find he had indeed forgotten it. He thought he wouldn't have time to go back and decided to go without it. At that moment, the departure bell rang, and he hurriedly boarded the train. However, there were too many people on board, and the conductor pushed him in with great effort. Just as the doors closed, he realized his coat had gotten caught, preventing him from turning his body. He reached back with his right hand to try to pull his coat free, and accidentally touched a woman in a white shirt, which displeased her. Teppei quickly apologized, but seeing his predicament, the woman said nothing further. He could only slowly pull his coat, and fortunately, just before reaching Yasukawa Station, he finally managed to free it. At that moment, he heard the girl say, "Please don't do that." And when he turned around, he saw her crying. After getting off at Yasukawa Station, he was grabbed by the sleeve and identified as the bad guy, and then the station staff took them to the duty room. Seeing this, the woman in white testified for him, saying he was just pulling his clothes caught in the door and was not a pervert. But the station staff did not listen to the explanation at all, and treated her as an unrelated person, refusing her entry. Teppei hurriedly opened the door to look for someone, but they were already gone. Faced with the lawyer, he complained for a while. "They seem to have decided it was me, asking nothing, just making me plead guilty and pay a fine, but I really didn't do it." However, the lawyer's reaction was even more unexpected. He actually advised him to plead guilty and settle privately, because if he did so, he could go out immediately after paying the fine. If he insisted on his innocence, it would lead to a long trial. First, there would be a 3-week investigation. Once the prosecutor decided to prosecute him, he would have to wait until the victim finished testifying before he could go out. Moreover, the current environment in Japan is one of presumed guilt, with a conviction rate of 99.9% in court. This means that out of 1,000 cases, only one can be acquitted, and in such cases of indecency, insisting on a trial does not yield good results. Teppei looked at the lawyer in disbelief and said, "I didn't do it. It wasn't me." The lawyer shouldn't have said this. but his previous client had just lost a similar case, and they couldn't fight against the unspoken presumption of guilt. Next was the 3-week investigation, and he placed his hopes on the prosecutor, hoping to clear his name. But unexpectedly, the prosecutor, like everyone else, didn't want to hear his defense and just urged him to plead guilty quickly. The prosecutor's office found indecent movies and magazines in his rental apartment, which further increased his suspicion. Tepe didn't understand. Does watching such movies automatically make me a pervert? Meanwhile, his mother and friends were out searching for a professional legal team to defend him. Very few people take such cases because there is absolutely no chance of winning. The law firm that dared to take it did so because the owner, Masayoshi, had previously been a judge and had more experience. Next, the deputy prosecutor and Officer Yamada bombarded him in turns, asking leading questions. "We hate the crime, not the person. Think carefully. Did you accidentally touch the other person's butt? That wouldn't be too hard." Tepe explained countless times that he had touched the woman in white on the right, holding a bag in his left hand, with no extra hands available. But no one listened, as if they wouldn't stop until they heard a confession. Lawyer Masayoshi reminded Tepe that if what he said was not accurately recorded in the investigation report, he must not sign it, because even slight differences could become evidence of guilt. If he signed it, he must correct it. Tepe asked if the conviction rate of 99.9% was true, and lawyer Masayoshi reassured him that it referred to all cases, including those who plead guilty. If he denied the incident, the acquittal rate would rise by about 3%, and without physical evidence and his confession, they could not prosecute based solely on the victim's testimony, so he shouldn't worry too much. This was the last day of the investigation, and after repeatedly denying several questions, suddenly the prosecutor asked why he had to pull up his clothes when the door would open at Anyakawa Station anyway. Tepe was stunned. Did he really need a reason to pull his own clothes? The prosecutor announced he would file charges, and he felt somewhat overwhelmed. Perhaps he should have listened to the duty lawyer from the beginning. Meanwhile, his mother and friends found an uncle who had a similar case. After being detained for 5 months, he was fortunate to be acquitted. The uncle told them that it was possible to be convicted based solely on the victim's testimony, and proving innocence was much harder than proving guilt. As long as they found eyewitnesses, the chances of being acquitted would increase significantly. So the group searched for the woman in white at the bustling station, and thus they welcomed the first court hearing. However, when they saw that the judge was Shogo, the defense lawyers breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was not well regarded by the media, he had a good reputation in the legal community because, in an era where acquittals had become rare, he was one of the few judges willing to rule not guilty. First, the prosecution presented the facts and displayed investigative evidence to which the defendant objected. During the second court session, the police testified, and the defense lawyer pointed out many flaws in the police's investigation and evidence collection process. First was the recreation of the scene. The model used in the report was quite different from the actual situation and did not simulate the actual heights of both parties. Secondly, there was no collection of the defendant's hand fibers on site. Instead, they repeatedly induced the defendant to confess through verbal means, and again, they did not accurately record the defendant's statement. Officer Yamada, however, was vague, citing negligence, and vehemently denied the defense's accusations. During the investigation phase, all the evidence was in the prosecutor's hands, and the defense lawyers had nothing. When and what evidence to present was the prosecutor's strategy. Once they filed charges, they would do everything possible to convict the defendant. What the lawyers could do was find flaws in the evidence presented by the other side and then overturn the charges, meaning the initiative was in the hands of the prosecution. However, this court session at least indicated that there were many unreasonable aspects in the police's investigation and evidence collection process. During the third court session, the victim took the stand. For the protection of the victim, the court took shielding measures. According to her testimony, she often encountered inappropriate behavior on the tram, but the police told her that not catching someone in the act did not count as evidence. So that day, she mustered the courage to grab the other person's hand. Although she quickly pulled back, her eyes followed the direction of her hand and saw the defendant behind her, and the color of the defendant's clothing matched the color of the sleeve she had grabbed. Moreover, that day, the woman in white said her top was caught, but her actions were strange. The defense lawyer questioned this. Since the victim determined that the hand belonged to the defendant based on the sleeve color, it indicated she had not been looking at that hand the whole time. Under the lawyer's questioning, the victim admitted that the other person's hand indeed disappeared for a moment as it was pulled back. She identified the defendant based on the color of the clothing and the direction in which the hand retreated, because the victim said she did not feel a hand moving from right to left behind her. The police had also told her that experiments proved there was no situation where a man from the left rear touched her. Thus, lawyer Masayoshi requested the prosecution to present the detailed report of the police's online experiment, but the prosecution did not have this evidence. After the victim testified in court, Teppei could be released on bail as per regulations, with a bail amount of 2 million yen. At this point, it had been 4 months since his detention, but the trial had just begun. The prosecution had finished presenting its case, and now it was the defense's turn, which essentially meant finding weaknesses in the opposing evidence. In the fourth hearing, the witness was another man who was in the carriage at the time. According to him, he saw the defendant moving suspiciously in the carriage, which prompted him to help the girl stop the defendant after they got off the train and take him to the station's duty room. The woman in white mentioned that she wasn't sure if he was a pervert, but he seemed very suspicious. During the fifth hearing, the judge was replaced, which was not good news for the defense. This new judge was not like Judge Shogo. He was a firm supporter of a guilty verdict. The witness this time was the station manager, who stated that he did not hear the woman in white say that the defendant was not a bad person, and he knew nothing else. The defense attorney requested to gather evidence, and a police officer testified again. Thus, the defense's requests were repeatedly denied, and the trial fell into a very unfavorable situation for the defense. To obtain more reliable evidence, Teppei and his lawyer decided to conduct an online simulation experiment to recreate the situation at that time. In the experiment, they found that from Teppei's position, if he pulled his hand back, his elbow would hit the train door, and he could not reach in front of the girl. However, a person standing to his left could easily escape if they bent down and reached from below. The woman in the experiment also confirmed that she could not feel from which direction the hand was pulled back. At this moment, Teppei recalled why he was so fixated on pulling his shirt out. He got on the train at Kinkyu Station, which opened in the opposite direction from where he was supposed to get off at Anzawa Station. To get off at Anzawa, he had to pass through the train and get off from the opposite door. However, because he wanted to confirm whether he had brought his resume that day, he got off at Gozodai Station, which opened in the same direction as Anzawa Station. When getting on the train, he subconsciously thought he had to pass through the crowded people, which is why he hurried to pull out his shirt. Seeing these results, everyone gained confidence. In the sixth hearing, the defendant took the witness stand and explained why he had been pulling at his shirt. Moreover, the eyewitness woman in white said in the station that this person was pulling his shirt that was caught in the door, and he was not a pervert. The prosecution's questions were the same as during the initial investigation, and the defendant answered them one by one. At this point, the prosecutor presented an indecent film found in the defendant's room as evidence to convict him. The judge asked again about the questions posed by the prosecutor and even began to lead the questioning. Defendant Teppei repeatedly explained, growing more and more angry, "I did not do it." The outcome of the trial was not ideal. Masayoshi told them that the judge was also a part of the bureaucratic organization. If he ruled not guilty, it would be a denial of the police and the prosecutor. The judge also needed promotions, and the smarter people were less willing to be deceived. Once deceived, it would be a dual loss of state power and personal reputation. As a result, there is an unconscious presumption of guilt, which leads to a 99.9% conviction rate, becoming a premise for the trial rather than a result of it. In the next court hearing, the defense provided clear and rigorous online experimental records of the scene, which the judge acknowledged but refused the defense's request for the duty lawyer to testify in court. They had no other evidence, but the litigation was not over. At this point, it had been 8 months since Teppei was detained, and hope was pinned on that woman in white, the mother, and friends, who were still searching like finding a needle in a haystack at the station. If this key eyewitness could be found, it might determine the outcome of the trial. Finally, good news arrived. She was found and willing to testify. According to her, after being frequently bumped by the defendant, she realized that he was just pulling his clothes caught in the door. After getting off, she followed him to the station's duty room to explain that he was only pulling his clothes caught in the door and should not be considered a pervert. However, the judge believed that the woman's testimony only indicated that she indeed saw the defendant pulling the clothes and could not confirm that the hand was not the defendant's because she had not been continuously watching him. This denial took the trial in a strange direction, as if it were not about seeking the truth, but whether the defense lawyer could prove the defendant's innocence, which is a typical presumption of guilt. At this point, all evidence and testimonies from both sides had been presented, and final statements began. The prosecution argued that this incident caused immense harm to the victim and her family, and that the young victim had the courage to confront the defendant. The defendant showed no remorse and denied the crime through various justifications, making it impossible to guarantee that he would not reoffend, and suggested a prison sentence of 4 months. The defense lawyer argued that the police's investigation and evidence collection process was not rigorous. There were omissions in the evidence, and there had been inducements for the defendant to confess. Moreover, the prosecution's case was solely based on the victim's testimony, which was fundamentally unfounded, and the defendant was innocent. The judge announced that the trial was concluded, and it was time for the defendant's statement. Tepe insisted that he was innocent. Since being involved in this incident for nearly a year, every day had been painful, but he had not done anything wrong. Standing in court to accept judgment was to clear his name. He had persisted until now, the 12th hearing, and the announcement of the verdict was set for May 10th, exactly 1 year after the incident. But in the end, Tepe received a 3-month prison sentence and was responsible for all litigation costs. The judge believed that the victim had the courage to apprehend the perpetrator and testify, detailing her experiences vividly and specifically, filled with a sense of immediacy. Furthermore, there was no connection of interest between the victim and the defendant, and no false accusation was present. As for the simulated experiment, while it could prove that the hand could not be pulled back, it could not prove that there was no possibility of pulling it upward. The credibility of the defendant's confession and evidence was low, and he refused to admit guilt, showing no intention of remorse, which had a severely negative impact. Society detested such incidents and demanded strict handling. Tepe stared straight at the judge, thinking that the courtroom was a place where the truth would come to light. Therefore, even when told that he could leave by simply pleading guilty and paying a fine of 50,000 yen, he insisted on going through the trial. But now he knows that's not the case. This is merely a place to determine whether the defendant is guilty. Although he has been found guilty, that is the court's ruling. In this trial, the only one who truly has the power to judge is himself, because he knows he is absolutely innocent. No one else can judge him. If the defendant is dissatisfied with the ruling, they can appeal within 14 days. I Just Didn't Do It is a movie from 2006 that left me feeling a bit heavy after watching it. The film showcases the flaws in Japan's current legal system from beginning to end. At first, almost no one argued from a fair standpoint. The case was preset by the police, prosecutors, and judges. This man reached out, and all of this made the core element of whether the defendant did it or not become unimportant. There is a part in the movie where a media person asks Judge Shogo what the greatest mission of a criminal trial is. Truth? Fairness? Neither. The greatest mission is to not punish innocent people. Japanese trains are indeed very crowded, which leads to many cases of train molestation. The rate of wrongful convictions in such cases is not high, probably only 0.1%. But even such a small percentage involves real, dignified people. By the end, I felt both upset and moved. The upsetting part is that Tepe ultimately did not attain his innocence, while the moving part is that he consistently stood by himself, resolutely refusing to admit to something he did not do. Perhaps one day he will prove his innocence.